Montana Territory, spring of 1881. The wind ran wild through the Bitterroot Valley, and the bride tore down the trail with blood on her dress and a shotgun in her hands. Brielle Zeller stumbled over a root, caught her balance, and kept running. The crimson stain on the front of her ivory wedding dress spread with each gasping breath. It wasn't her blood. She hadn't been hurt, only shaken, only furious, only alive by pure will. Behind her, the church bell kept ringing, but no one was coming after her now. Not after what she did. She reached the creek's edge, boots soaked, skirts heavy, and dropped the shotgun in the mud. Her chest heaved. Her hands trembled. Then she looked up and saw him. A man on a chestnut horse sat still beneath the aspens, rifle across his lap, eyes narrow beneath a black hat. Dust covered his coat, but his posture was alert, ready. He looked at her like she was not covered in another man's blood, like she was not a runaway bride who had just killed her groom. He looked at her like she was pure as snow. "Ma'am," he said, voice low, steady. "You hurt?" She blinked. "No. You armed?" "My shotgun's in the mud." He nodded once, then dismounted. "Name's Everett Walker. I won't hurt you." She backed up a step. "You sure about that?" "I am." Her eyes darted around. "You law?" "No, ma'am." Her knees buckled. Everett caught her before she hit the ground. She sagged against him, breath ragged, heart thudding like a war drum. His coat smelled of leather and pine. His hand settled on her back, warm and solid. "I didn't mean to kill him," she whispered. Everett didn't flinch. "Tell me what happened." Brielle pulled away just enough to stand on her own again. "His name was Thomas Lyle, my fiancé. We were supposed to marry this morning, but he locked the church doors, told the preacher to leave, pulled a knife." Everett's jaw tightened. "He said I was his now. That he bought me fair. My father owed him for the cattle. Thomas said I was payment." Brielle stared down at her hands. "I got the shotgun from the sacristy. I aimed for his shoulder, but he came at me. I shot him in the chest." Everett looked over at the blood-stained lace, the torn hem, the mud-covered train. "You did what you had to," she nodded, lips pressed tight. "I can't go back." "Then don't." She stared at him. "What?" "I got a cabin up in the pines. It's quiet. You can rest, figure things out. If you want to leave Montana after that, I'll help you." "Why?" He met her eyes. "Because you look like you need someone to stand still while the world spins." Something in her chest cracked. She blinked hard. "All right," she said. Everett helped her into the saddle, climbed up behind her, and turned the horse west toward the mountains. They reached his cabin by sundown. A simple place tucked between tall pines and rock ledges. Smoke curled from the chimney. A dog barked once from inside, then quieted. He helped her down gently, guiding her by the waist. She flinched as he touched the bloodied lace. "I'll find you something clean," he said. Inside, he handed her a faded cotton dress and stepped out while she changed. When she emerged, the fire was lit, stew simmered on the hearth, and the dog, an old mutt with a torn ear, rested at the door. Brielle sat stiffly by the fire. Everett handed her a bowl. "Eat." She did, slowly, then she looked at him. "You live alone?" "Mostly." "Family?" He hesitated. "Had a wife. She died 6 winters back. Fever, no children." She looked down into the bowl. "I am sorry." He gave a short nod. "What about you?" Brielle swallowed. "My father's dead, drank himself into the grave. My mother passed long before that. I got no one." Everett leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You do now." She looked up at him, startled. "I mean here, a roof, food, you're safe." She held his gaze. "Why do you care?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "Because when I saw you, covered in blood, running through the trees in a wedding dress, you looked like someone who had been hurt too many times, and I know what that feels like." Her breath caught. He stood. "You can sleep in the bed. I'll take the chair." She nodded. That night, Brielle lay beneath a wool blanket, staring up at the wooden beams, listening to the fire crackle. She had not felt safe in months. maybe years. She heard Everett shift in the chair, the dog sighing at his feet, and she whispered, "Thank you." His voice came low through the dark. "You're welcome." Morning broke cold and clear. Snow still clung to the northern ridge, but the valley below was greening. Brielle stepped outside into the sunlight, hair loose around her shoulders, boots borrowed from Everett. He was already chopping wood, sleeves rolled, sweat on his brow. She watched him a moment, then walked over. "Can I help?" He paused. "You ever chopped wood before?" "No," he grinned. "Then no." She laughed, a real laugh, rusty and short. He handed her a mug of coffee instead. "Sit. I'll teach you something useful later." They spent the day tending the garden, patching the roof, working side by side without needing to talk much. When they did speak, it was easy. No pretending. No guessing. By the third evening, she sat beside him on the porch with a blanket over her legs. He handed her a tin cup of warm cider, and she took it without a word. "You know," he said, "I was not expecting to find someone like you." "Someone like me, a bride with blood on her dress," he said, and fire in her eyes. She smiled faintly. "You looked at me like I was clean." "You were," he said. "You still are." Her throat tightened. "You really believe that?" "I do." She looked down at the cup. "I think I want to stay." He turned to her. "As long as you want," she swallowed. "And if I want forever?" He looked at her for a long moment, then reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Then I will build you a new wedding dress, and I will stand beside you, clean or bloodied, every day after." Brielle's eyes burned. She leaned into him, forehead resting against his, and for the first time in years, she felt whole. The morning after the frost lifted from the pine needles and the creek ran clearer than it had in weeks, Everett found her on the ridge above the cabin, seated on a flat stone, watching the sun warm the valley. She didn't turn when he approached, but her hand rested on something in her lap, a folded piece of paper, edges curled, ink smeared like it had seen more than one storm. "I wrote to my cousin once," Brielle said, voice even. "She's in Helena, married to a tinsmith. I never sent it." Didn't know what to say that wouldn't sound like begging. Everett eased down beside her, knees creaking. "You want to try again?" She shook her head slowly. "No. I think I wanted to hold onto the idea more than the person." The ridgeline stretched out before them, the valley floor dotted with grazing elk in the distance. The air smelled of lichen and turned earth. "Did you build the cabin yourself?" she asked after a long pause. "With my brother." "Years ago." She looked at him, brows drawing together. "Where is he now?" "Dead. Drowned in the river during spring runoff. He never did learn to respect the current. I'm sorry." He didn't look away from the valley. "He wasn't an easy man. But he was mine." She folded the letter twice more until it was a small square and tucked it into her skirt pocket. "I keep waiting to feel guilty," she said, "but I don't, not for what I did." "You won't," Everett said, "not if you know it was right." They walked back in silence. The dog trotted ahead, tail swaying. Everett opened the door and stepped aside so she could go in first. She paused in the doorway and turned. "Would you mind," she asked, "if I helped with the fence today?" He nodded once. "I've got a coil of new wire. We'll walk the southern line." The work was slow. The posts had shifted in the thaw, and the soil was soft beneath their boots. Brielle wore a pair of canvas trousers Everett had lent her, the cuffs rolled twice and still brushing the tops of her borrowed boots. She handled the wire with gloved hands, her face set in concentration. "You ever work land before?" Everett asked, passing her a staple. "My mother's father had a vineyard back in Ohio. I helped prune vines and press grapes, but nothing like this. You learn fast." She glanced over. "No one ever gave me time to learn anything proper." Everett tightened a knot against the post. "You've got time now." Late that afternoon, they took their supper outside. The last of the biscuits from the morning were split and slathered with honey. Brielle sat cross-legged on the porch while Everett leaned against the cabin wall, letting the quiet settle between them. "You ever go into town?" she asked. "Only when I need to. Supplies, mostly. Do people ask questions?" "They don't much bother me. Folks there know I keep to myself." She looked down at her hands. "What if they ask about me?" He waited a beat before answering. "I'll tell them you're someone who needed room to breathe." She considered that. "I think I'd like to go with you next time." He studied her face. "You sure? If I don't start walking forward, I'll rot where I stand." He nodded. "It's a 2-day ride to the supply post. We'll leave after the next rain clears." That night, the wind howled against the shutters. Inside, the coals in the hearth glowed low and the dog curled close to the warm stones. Everett stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the trees bend. "I still dream about it," Brielle said behind him. He turned. "Not the shooting. Before that. The way he smiled at me in front of the preacher, like he was proud he'd won something, like I was already his." Everett crossed the room and crouched beside where she sat on the edge of the bed. "You're not his." She touched her throat where a faint bruise lingered. "I know. But I keep hearing him say it, like a brand." He reached up, gently took her hand. "You'll rewrite that voice bit by bit." Her eyes searched his. "You really believe that?" "I do." She studied their joined hands. "You always this steady?" "Only since you came running through the trees." Her breath caught, but she said nothing. He let go of her hand and stood. "Get some sleep. I'll wake you if the roof leaks." By the time the storm passed 2 days later, the creek had doubled in size, and the trees dripped with new green. Everett packed 2 saddlebags with dried meat, flour, and a pouch of coin. Brielle rolled her blanket tightly, tied it behind the saddle, and mounted without hesitation. They rode in tandem, the trail narrow and slick in places. She didn't speak much, eyes scanning the woods, muscles tense. Everett kept his pace even, letting her set the rhythm. That evening, they stopped near an outcropping where the trees broke and the stars came bright and close. They built a small fire and ate quietly. The silence between them wasn't heavy, it simply was. As the flames cracked and the horses dozed nearby, Brielle pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders. "When I was a girl," she said, "I used to pretend I was riding west with a husband who let me speak my mind. I'd sit on the fence rail behind the house and name all the places we'd stop." Everett tossed another branch on the fire. "Where you want to end up didn't matter, just wanted him to listen." He looked across the fire at her. "I'm listening." She met his gaze. "I know." And that, more than anything, settled her. They lay down on either side of the fire, backs to the flame, the night full of the sound of wind in the pines and the slow breathing of horses. Everett didn't sleep right away. He watched the stars shift above the treetops and thought of the woman who had come out of the trees with blood on her dress and a voice like flint. She was changing, and she hadn't run from it. That, he thought, was the rarest kind of courage. The town of Darby was built low against the rise of the hills, its wooden storefronts still damp from the recent rain. The sky hung pale above the rooftops, and the main road was lined with wagon ruts filled with standing water. The general store stood near the center, a single hitching rail out front glistening with fresh pitch. Brielle dismounted without help, her spine straight despite the saddle hours. Her borrowed coat hung loose at the shoulders, and her hair was braided off her neck. She glanced around once, eyes steady, then followed Everett up the steps and into the store. A bell clanged overhead. The shopkeeper, a lean man with sleeves rolled to the elbow, looked up from weighing flour. His gaze flicked from Everett to Brielle, then back again, but he said nothing beyond a short "afternoon." Everett gave a nod and moved toward the dry goods. Brielle lingered near the jars of penny candy, her fingers brushing the glass lightly, not lingering. No one stared long, just enough to mark her as unfamiliar. That suited her fine. She turned when Everett called her name. "Pick a tin of tea, you'll be the one drinking it." She crossed to the shelf, eyes scanning the labels. "You don't take tea." "Not unless I'm sick or cornered." She pulled down a tin of black leaves, tucked it under her arm. "Then I'll make it strong." Once the supplies were gathered, wool, thread, salt, a small sack of barley, they stepped into the street again. The clouds had begun to break, and a shaft of light caught the dust rising off the boards. Brielle paused at the edge of the street, watching a boy chase a dog through the puddles. "When I was young, I thought towns were the answer to everything. Streets, shops, voices. All those people meant safety. And now I think too many voices can drown your own." They mounted and turned north, cutting through the edge of town. As they passed the livery, a woman stepped out beneath the porch, awning a tall figure in a wide skirt, shawl drawn tight. She called out, "Walker." Everett reined in. "Mrs. Vance." Her eyes narrowed on Brielle. "You've been gone 3 days. Had to mend fence before the creek rose." The woman's gaze flicked toward Brielle again, but her expression didn't sharpen, just settled. "You'll want to know sheriff came through day before yesterday, asking about a woman fitting a certain description. Said there was a dead man found in Emmett's church." Brielle's stomach turned to ice. Everett didn't turn his head. "What did you say?" "That I hadn't seen anyone but you." Which was true at the time. He nodded once. "Thank you. Just be careful, Everett. Folks talk more than they think." They rode on without a word until the town shrank behind them and the trees closed in. The silence held until they reached the bend in the trail where the wind ran strongest. Brielle spoke first. "She knew. She did." "Why'd she cover for you?" "She owed my wife once. Long time ago." Brielle looked at him sidelong. "You keep a lot of people's debts quiet." "I don't measure in debts." She rode a while without speaking. "Then, what happens if the sheriff finds me?" "I won't let him take you." "You can't promise that." "I can. I just did." Her throat ached with the weight of it. "You'd risk your name for mine." "I don't have much use for a name if it doesn't mean something." They reached the cabin before dusk. The dog barked once, then bounded down the slope, tail high. Everett dismounted, tied off the reins, and reached to help her down. She didn't hesitate this time. Her hand found his, warm and firm. Inside, she unpacked the tea while he lit the fire. The air smelled of pine smoke and damp wool. She filled the kettle and set it to boil, then turned to him. "I need to do more than mend fence and boil water, Everett. You've done more than that already. I want to earn what I have here." He leaned against the hearth, arms crossed. "Then we'll go through the ledgers tomorrow. I've got room to plant more barley. You can take that on if you want it." "I do." The kettle hissed. She poured 2 cups and handed him one. He didn't protest. They sat by the fire, the dog stretched between them, and let the heat settle into their bones. The wind rattled the shutters once, then fell still. She turned her cup in her hands. "You ever think about leaving this place?" "Sometimes. But it's the only spot I've ever felt like myself." She looked into the flames. "I never knew what that felt like." "Not until now." He didn't speak, just reached out slowly and placed his hand over hers. The fire popped. The clock ticked once. She didn't pull away. By mid-May, the soil warmed enough to plant, and the valley took on its summer hush, the kind of quiet that hummed just beneath birdsong and breeze, as if the earth itself were listening. Brielle rose before the first light most mornings now, slipping her arms into her blouse and boots before Everett stirred from his blankets. She didn't need waking. The barley field stretched behind the cabin, nearly an acre of turned earth bordered by pine and stone. She moved through it with practiced rhythm. seed pouch slung across her shoulder, bare hands pressing each kernel into the soft furrow. The wind pulled at her braid and carried the scent of far-off sage. "Your lines are straighter than mine," Everett said one morning, watching from the edge of the fence with his hat in his hand. "I had good ground," she answered, not looking up. He stepped closer, one boot dragging through the loose soil. "I've seen men who have planted half their lives do worse." She dusted her palms on her skirt. Maybe they weren't trying to grow something worth keeping. He didn't answer, and she didn't push. The silence between them no longer held distance. Later that day, while she mended a tear in the cabin's curtain, Everett returned from the North Trail with a bundle of pelts slung over his saddle and a new scuff along his jaw. "What happened?" she asked as he stepped inside, dropping the furs near the hearth. "Trapper's dog took offense to me walking too close to their camp. I didn't see the animal until it was already on me." She crossed the room, wet a cloth in the basin, and reached for his face. "You let a dog get the better of you. I let the man keep his dog." "Thought that was fair." She dabbed gently at the scrape. "You're bleeding, only a little still." He watched her as she worked. "You're not afraid of blood anymore." "I never was," she said. "I just hated what it meant." That night, the heat held late, and they ate outside beneath a sky streaked with rose and ash. The dog lay sprawled beside Brielle's boots, thumping his tail every now and again without lifting his head. Everett leaned his chair back against the cabin wall, fingers wrapped around a mug of watered whiskey. "You ever think about marrying again?" she asked, eyes fixed on the ridge. "No," she turned toward him. "Not even once. Didn't seem right." Then didn't seem possible. And now, he was quiet a long time. The mug rested against his knee. "Now it seems like a thing I'd want to do right." She nodded once. "I wouldn't wear white again." "I know. I wouldn't want a preacher either." "I figured." She glanced down at the scar on her palm from the day she'd sliced it open on a cedar branch while clearing brush. What if all we had was a promise and a quiet morning to make it? That'd be enough. The wind shifted, and she reached across the table, laying her hand over his. "You already gave me more than I knew how to ask for," she said. He closed his fingers around hers. "You gave me back my voice." They didn't speak again until the moon rose high and the stars thickened like spilled salt across the sky. When they finally went inside, he reached for her hand again, not asking, not leading, just holding. She followed him without hesitation. And when he kissed her, it was slow, steady as the way he rode, the way he built fences, the way he'd waited for her to come to stillness on her own. Their bed was warm, but it was the way he looked at her that made her tremble, not with fear, but with the kind of reverence she'd never known a body could carry. When dawn came, she stood at the doorway, wrapped in a wool blanket, watching the mist lift from the field she'd planted. Behind her, Everett stirred the fire back to life, careful not to wake the dog. "You think it'll grow?" she asked without turning. He set the kettle above the flame. "I do." She smiled, quiet and sure. By summer's end, the barley would stand golden and thick. And though no one in town ever asked again about the girl with fire in her eyes who came out of the trees, they remembered the man who began smiling with his whole face, and the woman who walked beside him like she'd always belonged. They never needed a church or a name carved in stone. Just the land, the cabin, and each other. And in that silence they built there forever. The barley came in thick that June, stalks high and rustling like silk when the breeze moved across them. Brielle stood at the edge of the field with her hands on her hips, watching the grain sway under the weight of its own promise. The sun sat low behind her, stretching her shadow across the furrows she'd walked alone in April. Now, Everett walked beside her. "I'll need to thresh it by hand," she said. "Won't be quick." "We've got all the time we want," he answered, resting a calloused hand against her shoulder. She leaned into his touch without thinking. Her voice was softer when she said, "I want to grind it myself, too." "For the bread." Everett's hand dropped to hers. "There's an old millstone in the shed. You'll need to set it right, but it should turn." By the end of the week, the grain was stacked beneath a canvas tarp, and Brielle's arms ached with the kind of satisfaction that left her smiling at her own reflection in the cabin window. She'd started wearing her hair up in a kerchief by then, kept her sleeves rolled, and had taken to walking barefoot in the evenings. The earth felt different underfoot when it belonged to you. One morning, a rider came up the trail. Everett spotted him first, standing with one hand on the hitching rail, his face unreadable. "Friend of yours?" Brielle asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "Used to be," he said. The man dismounted slowly, dust rising from his boots. He was rangy, older than Everett by a few years, and carried a tiredness in his shoulders that spoke of long travel. He tipped his hat toward Brielle. "Ma'am," she nodded, wary but calm. "My name's Josiah Tanner," he said. "I rode out from Emmett." Heard Everett was still up this way. "What do you want?" Everett asked, his tone even but firmer than Brielle had ever heard it. Josiah looked between them. "I came to say there won't be any more talk about the girl. Sheriff's moved on." Town's quiet again. Brielle exhaled slowly, steadying herself. Josiah added, "Folks figured out fast that Thomas Lyle wasn't the sort worth mourning." Everett didn't answer right away, but his jaw eased. "What made you come all the way out here to say it?" Brielle asked. Josiah scratched at his chin. "I owed Everett's brother once. Didn't pay that debt right when he was living. Thought maybe I'd try now." Everett shifted. "You've said your piece." Josiah gave a single nod, then turned to his horse. "You've got a good place here." Real quiet. He mounted without another word and rode off down the trail. Brielle watched him go until the trees swallowed him. Then she turned to Everett. "You never mentioned him." "Didn't think I needed to." She studied his face. "You all right?" he nodded. "Just reminded me I was lucky that day when you came out of the woods." She stepped closer. "I was lucky too." That night, they sat on the porch while the fireflies blinked low in the grass. Everett had carved a new handle for the churn, and Brielle stitched a hem that had torn on the edge of the woodpile. They didn't speak for a long time, not needing to. Then Everett said, "You ever think about putting down more than barley?" Brielle looked up. "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe we build something more. A root cellar, maybe a chicken coop, maybe a room for a child if we're blessed that way." She set her sewing aside, her eyes full of quiet light. "You'd want that. I want a life with you. Whatever shape it takes." She reached across the space between them, laced her fingers through his. "Then let's build it." They married in the clearing behind the cabin, with summer still thick on the wind. No preacher, no crowd. Just a ring Everett had hammered from a length of copper, and a vow spoken beneath the branches of a pine they both loved. The dog barked once, then settled near Everett's boots like he understood. Brielle wore a dress she'd sewn herself, blue like the sky above the ridge, with small mother-of-pearl buttons down the front. Everett wore his best shirt, the one without the mended collar, and he shaved that morning without being asked. She said, "I give you my hand so we can work side by side." He said, "I give you my heart so you never have to walk alone." They kissed once, then again, and when they stepped back they were already smiling. The seasons turned. The barley gave way to potatoes, beans, then squash. Everett built the root cellar with stone pulled from the ridge, and Brielle cured the walls with lime. She learned to make soap from ash and fat, and he cut a cradle from pine with his own hands. By the next spring, there was a baby in the crook of her arm, a girl with Everett's eyes and Brielle's quiet mouth. They named her Lark, For the birds that sang outside their window each dawn on warm mornings, Everett carried Lark out to the porch and sang under his breath while he rocked her. Brielle would work in the garden, glancing up now and then, her hands in the soil, her heart steady. They grew old that way, not quickly, not without hardship, but with a steadiness that held through every storm and every long winter night. Brielle never ran again. She didn't need to. And Everett never stopped building the kind of home a woman could run to and never feel afraid. Their love was not loud, but it was deeply known. In every gesture, in every shared chore, in every silent moment that passed between them with nothing needing to be said. They lived together until their hair turned silver, and even then, Everett still reached for her hand on the porch, and every time she still reached back.